is Michael Turquato, and I'll be discussing the ethical dilemmas in genetic modification. So, what is genetic modification? Genetic modification is a controversial issue and has been going on since the 1970s. It is a technique to change the genetic makeup of a plant, animal, or microorganism by transferring a piece of DNA from one organism to another. This is done through targeted removal of the desired genes from the DNA of one organism and adding them to another organism. This has been growing and becoming easier with today's technology, resulting in CRISPR. So how do we use genetic modification in today? Believe it or not, genetic editing and modification has been going on for many years. The food industry uses these skills every day. That is why chicken breast has pretty much doubled in the last 50 years. Unless the food you're eating has a non-GMO seal or approved or says organic, the product will be full of GMOs. In the past, however, people took genetic editing to a more barbaric and physical approach. Forced slave mating was very popular back then in order to ensure that the owner would have strong slaves. Another way is through dog breeding. This is a lot less crude since achieving consent is not an issue for dogs, but it still serves as a prime example for genetic editing. It has never been taken to the extent that CRISPR has taken. Germline therapy. Germline therapy targets reproductive cells which can further affect the next generations. It causes a big ethical dilemma in society on how it affects individual rights. It affects how when a baby is born, it doesn't have the choice to make their individual rights yet. So when they're being tested on, they're not really given a choice, which has been the biggest individual right dilemma. And it could fully affect the baby in the long run if it goes bad, or it can give them a disability for life. And while doing this from the start, they never had the choice to choose whether they wanted to be tested on with genetic modification or germline therapy. But it doesn't, it does affect how their safety will be in the future. And that has been one of the biggest individual rights ethical issues. But there is also another way that has been tested, such as the somatic cell therapy, which we'll go into the next slide. Somatic cell therapy has been one of the biggest alternatives in dodging the individual rights and public safety issues that people have been having problems with in germline therapy. So the somatic cell modification affects the body's cells of a person who has already been born. This can also help with genetic disorders that the person has developed. And this does not affect future generations, as germline therapy does affect future generations, which has always been another ethical issue. And even though this is a good alternative, some may say that you're still playing God by tampering with the way people cure genetic disorders or how they were supposed to come out. So somewhat dodging an ethical issue, but it really depends on the person's perspective. So when comparing these types of gene therapy, such as somatic cell gene therapy and germline gene therapy, somatic cell gene therapy has been a therapeutic genes transferred into the somatic cells. It introduces a lot of genes into bone marrow cells, blood cells, skin cells, etc., and will not be inherited in future generations. It also presents all the researches directed to correct genetic defects in somatic cells. And this is one of the, I would say, safer ways of genetically modifying individuals and for the greater good, to help diseases and to help unsolved diseases. So with germline therapy, the therapeutic genes transferred into the germ cells and the genes introduced into the eggs and sperm. It is heritable and passed on to later generations. For safety, ethical, and technical reasons, it is not being attempted at present, which is why it is the biggest ethical dilemma, because it can enhance and affect future generations, which can cause plenty of problems. So if it were up to me, I would say somatic cell gene therapy would be the safer way, but it really depends on your perspective as well, on how you look at things, if you still feel like you're tampering with how God created you or not. So is genetic modification ethical? Well, in the article in Germline Therapy Ethical, it talks about the process of how germline therapy targets the reproductive cells, meaning any changes made to the DNA will be passed on to the next generation. This has been one of the main ethical issues throughout human research engineering, the sex of the baby, or what features it would have. I always felt that genetic modification towards a baby's features, or the way they look, their eye color, their nose shape, or giving them super strength or anything like that, was very unnecessary, and I feel like is unethical. The only way I feel like this genetic modification would be ethical is to keep the experiment into public moral consideration, or GMOs, the general moral considerations for public health. You know, everybody has to be safe, and to realize that the main issue is to help cure diseases and help cure unsolved diseases to further future lifespan, or to help the world be a healthier place in general. And the following issue that relates to individual human rights is whether it is messing with religion. It was my last point. And either way you look at it, it somehow does affect the way with religion. But like I said, it still goes either way on how you look at things. Many religious people might say that it does, and maybe some religious people might say that it doesn't. So yeah. Well, as we continue on the genetic modification and how it tampers with God, it would create a power struggle between man and God. And people would think that they are above him And science has done many wonderful things, however, genetic editing would do more spiritual harm. And it's hard to say because in the past, we've developed more vaccinations for measles and chickenpox and all these vaccinations. If we didn't have science, there would be a lot of viruses affecting mankind. And so technically you can say vaccinations is against, or would you say playing with God? And so it's hard to say as we progress in technology and progress in the science of healthcare, how like vaccinations would be affecting religion as well. And in my opinion, I would say maybe God gave us this knowledge to further help mankind with diseases or to help people and do something for the greater good. Because overall, this experiment of genetic modification is for the greater good, and it just has to go on about the right way and just keeping the same morals throughout the process. But does genetic modification apply to the moral considerations? Overall, I feel like genetic modification experimenting right now doesn't follow the general moral considerations. And I say this because it affects, individual rights, safety, very high in price. So when I say very high in price, I mean like when they do come out genetic modification, it is safe. A lot of people won't be able to get the benefit due to how high the price is. And genetic modification should be available, I would say, to everyone to affect the world in a more greater good for more people. The rich is a very small percentage of the world, and I do believe that it would only affect the rich because it'd be so expensive to help with this genetic modification process. Yeah. Overall, like I was saying, we do not want to create the next Captain America or Super Soldier Serum. I don't know if you're a Marvel nerd or not, but it's like genetically modifying somebody to become a super soldier. And ethically, it's not correct because of one, only affecting a certain amount of people, and two, it comes with plenty of issues, and not just statistical issues, but I guess I would say individual issues, as in experiences such as emotion and how it could affect them. And I guess we'll never know until further experimenting. But yeah, during this show, you learn that when somebody's genetically modified, it doesn't really go so well, considering, just because it gives you super strength. We need to look at genetic modification as something that just has to do with helping diseases and maybe solving unsolved diseases that we haven't solved yet to better keep the world a healthier place and to maybe ensure longer lifespan in humans to just live a long lasting life instead of looking at genetic modification as a characteristic or a feature of just changing eye color or changing the way the baby hair looks, or basically just doing extra stuff like that, which is not that much of a benefit. And we need to make sure that researchers, I feel, know that, it's not about doing up a baby as in features. It's about creating a healthier world. And, hopefully this experiment goes on to be more ethical and stand more in the moral public health rules and to further their research. As of right now, they're researching on pigs to help gather information to help out humans. And yes, that is a way to find research or find information through animals to help humans. But that's also another ethical issue that people face, is giving animals rights. And I guess it's hard to dodge that one as well. So, furthermore, I think the overall idea of genetic modification is for the good, but it still needs more research. It needs more experimenting to make this something greater for the world and make it for the greater good. And this is my presentation, and my references will be on the next slide.